The emergency room at Mercy General Hospital in Austin, Texas, was unusually quiet for a Friday evening. The fluorescent lights buzzed low overhead, and the only sound came from nurses typing into electronic charts and the occasional squeak of rubber soles against polished tile. That quiet, however, didn't last long. At 6:17 p.m., the automatic glass doors burst open with a hiss. Two paramedics rushed in, pushing a stretcher draped in blood-soaked linens. 30-something female, one of them called out. Found unresponsive at home by her housekeeper, hemorrhaging from the rectal area, suspected complication from outpatient surgery. Dr. Luke Marlowe had just ended his shift and was halfway out of his white coat when the commotion caught his attention. At 33, he was one of the youngest trauma surgeons on staff, but already known for his precision in high-pressure situations and his reputation for taking the cases others quietly hoped to avoid. He turned back, rolled up his sleeves, and approached the gurney. "Vitals? BP's crashing," the triage nurse reported. "She's going into shock. No ID on her. Housekeeper didn't know her full name. Just Miss Ellen." Luke's eyes flicked to the woman's face. Pale, unconscious, lips parted slightly like someone trying to form a word but never quite getting there. Her dark hair was matted with sweat, her breathing shallow and erratic. Another doctor leaned in close. Dr. Patel, senior attending. "You don't want this one, Luke," he warned quietly. "Word is, she's someone important. If this goes sideways, it's your license, your name, your future." Luke didn't flinch. He looked back down at the woman, then back at Patel. "She's dying on this table. That's all I need to know." Without waiting for further protest, he called out, "Prep OR2, let's move." Inside the operating room, chaos met control. The bleeding was far more severe than expected. Her internal rectal tissues had been torn apart, likely due to an unregulated laser treatment from a boutique cosmetic clinic. Infection had already set in. Her blood pressure was in freefall, 72/38. Her pulse was weak, thready. "Clamp here," Luke said, his voice steady. "Flush with saline. We need to control this bleeding now." Nurses moved with focused urgency, their hands following his as he worked. Suction, suture, clamp, flush, again and again. "She's fibrillating," the anesthesiologist yelled. "Push 1 milligram epinephrine," Luke ordered, not missing a beat. The room stilled. The beeping monitors were flat for just a breath too long. Then rhythm, weak, but it was back. 3 hours later, he peeled off his gloves with a heavy sigh. The bleeding had stopped. The infection was being aggressively treated. Structurally, she had a fighting chance. But as they transferred her to ICU, the neurologist gave a grim report. "She's in a coma, no trauma to the brain, might be an adverse reaction to anesthesia or shock-related. We won't know for days, maybe weeks." Within the hour, Luke found himself sitting before the hospital review board. The tension in the conference room was as thick as the air in the OR. A folder slammed onto the table. "Do you know who this woman is?" one of the board members demanded. Luke shook his head. "Ellen Barrett," the director snapped, "founder of Barrett and Stone Real Estate Holdings, worth over $200 million. You operated without consent on a high-profile figure. If she doesn't recover—" "I saved a life," Luke replied, exhausted but calm. "Not a portfolio." Whispers spread like wildfire through the hospital. A young doctor had taken on a patient no one wanted. A woman with power, wealth, and now a broken body. Nurses watched him pass in the hallway like he was a soldier who'd walked through fire barefoot. Some thought him reckless. Others, brave. That night, when most of the ICU visitors had gone home, Luke returned to room 421. Ellen lay still, machines humming steadily around her. No flowers, no family, no fanfare. He sat beside her and whispered, "I don't know who you are, but I'm not leaving." He opened a worn book of poetry from his coat pocket, the corners dog-eared from use, and began to read softly. Outside, the city of Austin moved on, unaware that inside this quiet hospital room, something far more important had just begun. The ICU always felt different after hours, quieter, heavier somehow. Nurses spoke in hushed tones, and the rhythmic pulse of monitors became the only soundtrack. Most families went home by nightfall, but not Dr. Luke Marlowe. He came every evening after his shift, sometimes still in scrubs, sometimes in jeans and a hoodie thrown over his hospital badge. He never missed a night. Room 421 had become part of his daily rhythm, like brushing his teeth or checking his watch. Not out of obligation, but something harder to name. Something that tugged at him when the rest of the world faded. Ellen Barrett still lay unconscious. Her vitals had stabilized, but she hadn't stirred. A coma, the neurologist said, induced by trauma or compounded by a rare anesthetic reaction. "It's just waiting now," one of them had told him. "There's nothing else we can do." But Luke didn't believe in nothing. Each night he entered quietly. He'd sanitize his hands, check the chart, though he was no longer her official attending, then sit in the same gray armchair by her bedside. Some nights he read, some nights he simply talked. "Vitals are holding steady," he would whisper, glancing at the monitor. "You've made it another day. That counts for something." At first, he stuck to medical updates or stories from the ER, funny ones mostly, the kind that wouldn't scare her if she could hear. But then, as the nights went on, he told her more. He told her about growing up in rural Oklahoma, about how his mom worked 2 jobs at a diner and a laundromat just to keep the lights on. He told her about his little sister Ruby, who used to wait on the porch every day at 3 p.m. for him to come home with a new fact of the day from the school library. He told her about the night their mom collapsed on the kitchen floor and how no ambulance ever came because they lived too far out and Medicaid didn't cover everything. "She was strong," he said softly, brushing a strand of Ellen's hair away from her cheek one night. "But she didn't have someone like me back then. That's why I do this, why I stayed that night." Nurse Beth, who worked the graveyard shift, noticed. She brought him a blanket on the colder nights, and once, without a word, left a cup of chamomile tea by Ellen's bedside. "You know she probably can't hear you," she said gently one evening. "I know," Luke replied, "but just in case she can, I want her to hear something that might make her want to come back." And so he kept coming. He brought little comforts, a soft speaker that played Debussy or soft jazz, a lavender sachet for her pillow, a cherrywood hairbrush he used to gently smooth her hair. He massaged her hands to keep the joints from stiffening and dabbed her lips with balm when they cracked. It wasn't in the charts. It wasn't in any manual. But it felt right. One night he read from The Little Prince. "It is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye," he quoted, looking up at her pale, sleeping face. "Yeah, I know, kinda cheesy," he added with a smile, "but I think you get it." He didn't know her voice. He didn't know what she laughed at or how she liked her coffee, but somehow, through the quiet, he began to know her. Not the billionaire, not the CEO, just Ellen. She had delicate wrists, slightly calloused fingertips that didn't match the tabloid's version of her. Her bedside table, the only personal thing in the room, held a photo slipped in by the housekeeper, a woman in her early 30s, smiling gently next to a golden retriever. Her expression didn't look posed. It looked real. "I think you're more than what people say," Luke murmured one night. "More than a name. More than a bottom line." The hospital administration had started to notice. His involvement, though unofficial, raised eyebrows. Whispers passed between board members about professionalism, boundaries, potential liability. But no one stopped him. Maybe they saw something too. Beth did. One night she paused in the doorway and watched as Luke adjusted Ellen's blanket with a gentleness that didn't belong in a hospital full of hurry and procedure. "You're not just her surgeon anymore, are you?" she asked softly. Luke looked up, uncertain how to answer. "I don't know when it changed," he admitted, "but I look at her and I don't see status. I see someone fighting for her life, and I guess I just don't want her to fight alone." Beth nodded, her eyes soft. "Sometimes people wake up not because of medicine, but because someone stayed." That night, the air in room 421 felt different. Luke closed the poetry book and leaned closer to the still woman beside him. "I'll keep coming," he whispered. "Even if you never open your eyes, even if you forget all of this, I'll be here." In the hum of the machines, a pulse beeped steady and soft. Somewhere deep in the shadows of unconsciousness, something stirred. Not movement, not awareness, but a beginning. In the silence of her coma, Ellen Barrett drifted somewhere between sleep and nothingness. Time didn't pass the way it used to. There was no pain, no clear thought, only fragments, shadows, weightlessness. At first there was only darkness, deep, empty, but then something else. A warmth near her hand, the soft scent of lavender, and a voice. It came and went, gentle and low. At times it recited lines she vaguely remembered from childhood, fairy tales maybe. Other times it told stories, spoke of loss, of waiting tables, of a woman with tired hands and a heart too big for her body. Ellen didn't know the man behind the voice, but the sound of him became her anchor. She clung to it when the void grew too cold. He read aloud, poems mostly. Once, she thought she heard him laugh softly and say something about the little prince. It made something inside her ache in a way she didn't understand. Then he told her things, personal things, about Oklahoma, about his mother dying too young, about guilt that never really left. He talked about the hospital food, the long hours, and how he hadn't seen a proper sunset in weeks. He even admitted to singing off-key just to make the nurses smile. And every time he said her name, Ellen, it felt less like a label and more like a touch. In that nameless space where she floated, the voice became the only real thing. She waited for it without realizing she was waiting. It was the sound of someone staying, and slowly memory began to stir. Ellen Barrett, real estate heiress, billionaire, alone. Her life had never really belonged to her. She was born into a legacy so large it eclipsed everything else. Childhood for her was a revolving door of nannies and a schedule packed tighter than a corporate planner. Her parents, owners of Barrett and Stone Holdings, were more acquainted with market trends than bedtime stories. At age 25, they were gone, killed instantly when their private jet crashed en route to a development conference in Seattle. Headlines read, "Empire lost its crown," but no one asked how Ellen felt. No one wanted to. She was expected to lead, to recover, to rise, and she did. She built the company even larger, outpaced the old benchmarks. She became a storm in heels, admired, feared, and envied. Her face appeared in Forbes, her name mentioned in mergers that shaped skylines. She had assistants, lawyers, investors, but never friends. Only Judith, her mother's former personal assistant, remained from the world before. Judith remembered her birthday, brought her soup when she had the flu, reminded her to wear flats on long travel days. And then came Nathan. He had a warm smile, clever eyes, and a voice that seemed to slip under her armor. She let him in, let herself believe in something simple for once. Connection, love. Until she discovered he had been hired by a rival firm to infiltrate her life, build trust, sabotage an acquisition. The engagement ring he gave her was part of the plan. Ellen ended it quietly. No press, no scandal, just silence. She shut more doors, built more walls, attended fewer events, trusted no one. But the emptiness gnawed at her, so she turned inward, not spiritually, but cosmetically. Rhinoplasty, skin resurfacing, microlifting. Just small adjustments, her doctor said. It'll help with stress, make you feel more in control. Control, that was the word she lived by, until control cost her her body. She had returned from a second procedure at a luxury clinic in Houston when she collapsed in her foyer. The maid found her with blood on her nightgown and a faint whisper of breath. She remembered none of it, not the ambulance, not the surgery, just the dark and the voice. The man behind the voice didn't know her name when he chose to stay. He hadn't seen the boardroom deals or the magazine covers. He didn't care about her net worth or who her father had been. He just stayed. And in her unconscious state, something fragile and long buried began to surface. She wasn't used to kindness without cost. She wasn't used to not being wanted for something. But this voice, this man, wanted nothing. He gave, without asking. He stayed, without knowing. And it stirred something in her that hadn't been touched in years. Hope. The first movement came quietly, a twitch of her fingers, a subtle change in her breathing. Nurse Beth noticed it just before sunrise. By 6:08 a.m., Ellen's eyelids fluttered. The monitors beeped a little faster. Her lips parted. Her chest rose and fell with a rhythm that was finally blessedly her own. When her eyes opened, they were glazed and confused. The lights were harsh. The air smelled of antiseptic and cotton. But she was awake. Beth leaned in, voice trembling. "Ellen, you're safe. You're at Mercy General. You've been in a coma for 3.5 weeks." Ellen tried to speak. Her throat was dry. The words barely came. "A man," she rasped. "Someone was reading to me." Beth's eyes lit with surprise and a quiet smile. "That would be Dr. Marlowe. He never left your side." Ellen blinked slowly, her gaze distant, but somewhere in the haze she smiled. Faint, but real. So the voice was real. And maybe, just maybe, so was everything it had made her believe. Luke Marlowe hadn't planned to stop by that afternoon. His hands were still sore from a grueling back-to-back surgery, and his body begged for rest. But something, habit, instinct, or maybe just the quiet pull of room 421, drew him back. He carried the usual, a thermos of herbal tea and the same dog-eared poetry book he'd read from for weeks. He entered the ICU with a kind of reverence, nodding gently at the nurses who had long stopped questioning his visits. But when he turned the corner and saw Nurse Beth standing at Ellen's bedside, her expression frozen somewhere between awe and joy, he knew something was different. Beth turned to him slowly. "She's awake," she whispered, her voice cracking. The tea nearly slipped from his hands. He stepped closer, and for the first time since that chaotic night in the OR, he saw Ellen Barrett's eyes open. Really open. Not the faint flutter of coma reflexes, but focused, present. She looked at him, not through him, at him, and for a moment the room held its breath. Ellen blinked, her gaze lingering on his face. Her voice was hoarse, barely more than a breath. "It's you," she whispered. "You're the one who stayed." Luke's throat tightened. He swallowed hard before answering. "Yeah, it's me." Her lips trembled into the ghost of a smile. "I thought, maybe I imagined you." He pulled the visitor's chair closer, careful not to crowd her. "Nope," he said gently, easing down. "I'm very real, and I've been reading you some terrible poetry for weeks. I'm not sure you're going to forgive me." Her smile deepened slightly, though it faded quickly into fatigue. "You read to me," he nodded, "every night." There were so many things he could have said then, that he didn't know why he started, that he hadn't expected to care, that seeing her still, night after night, made him realize how fragile life and connection could really be. But he didn't say any of that. Instead, he watched her as she closed her eyes for a moment, as if anchoring herself in this new reality. "How long?" she murmured. "You've been unconscious for 24 days." A long silence stretched between them. Ellen stared up at the ceiling, her eyes glassy. "I remember. The dark. The pain. But then I'd hear you. I didn't know who you were, but it was the only thing that felt safe." Luke sat very still, absorbing her words like they were sacred. "I thought you might hear me," he said softly. "Didn't know for sure, but I hoped." Tears welled in her eyes and she blinked them back fast, out of habit more than emotion. Ellen Barrett wasn't used to being vulnerable, but this wasn't a boardroom. This wasn't a photo op. This was raw and human. "I don't even know your first name," she whispered. "Luke," he said. "Luke Marlowe." She nodded slowly. "Ellen," she offered, though they both knew he'd known that long before she ever opened her eyes. The overhead lights buzzed faintly. Machines beeped. But between them, there was a rare kind of stillness, like the moment just before rain, when the sky holds its breath. She reached for the teacup in his hand, her fingers barely steady. He helped her hold it, gently guiding it to her lips. She sipped, then grimaced. "Still chamomile?" He chuckled, a deep, warm sound that surprised them both. "It's supposed to be calming. It tastes like wet hay." "Good, you're definitely back." Their eyes met again, and something unspoken passed between them. This wasn't the reunion of lovers. It was something quieter, deeper, recognition. Luke cleared his throat and glanced toward the door. They'll probably want to run more tests now that you're up. Neurology, PT, maybe even psych evals if the board has their way. Let them, Ellen said, then paused. As long as you're around. He hesitated, unsure how to respond. Boundaries, ethics, professionalism. They all shouted in the back of his mind. But her eyes held him still, not pleading, just asking. I'll be here, he said at last, as long as you want me. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. That night, after the rounds were done, and the hallway lights dimmed to half power, Luke sat with her again, not as her surgeon, not as her savior, just as a man who had chosen to stay. Ellen didn't talk much that evening. Her strength was still returning in pieces, but she didn't need words. She just needed presence. And for the first time in her adult life, she let herself rest while someone else kept watch. The days passed quietly. Ellen's body healed faster than expected. The bruises faded. Her strength returned bit by bit through hours of physical therapy and quiet persistence. But her mind, that was a more delicate recovery. Luke visited every day, no longer in scrubs, no longer carrying charts, just a man with a quiet voice and a presence that didn't ask for anything in return. He helped her practice walking, brought books she hadn't read, music she hadn't heard in years. They shared late-night tea and longer silences, but something hung between them. Not distance exactly, more like weight, a question unspoken, a truth waiting its turn. One evening, the rain tapped lightly against the windows of Ellen's penthouse rehab suite. The city lights shimmered across the wet pavement 12 floors below. Inside, the fireplace crackled softly, casting amber light across the room. Ellen sat curled in a deep gray armchair, her legs drawn under her, wrapped in a thick sweater. She was stronger now. She could walk unassisted, eat without help. But emotionally, she felt like she was standing barefoot on a cliff's edge. Luke sat across from her, nursing a cup of mint tea he hadn't really touched. She broke the silence first. "Can I ask you something?" His eyes lifted. "Of course." She turned toward the fire, her voice low. "When I was 8, my father left. No goodbye. Just a legal transfer of guardianship and a wire of money." Her lips curved slightly bitter. "My mother told me he was traveling for work. I knew better." Luke didn't interrupt. "At 13, I overheard a teacher say I'd be too cold to ever be loved properly. At 15, I started changing things. My nose, my posture, the way I smiled in pictures. By 18, I'd had my first minor procedure. By 21, I could walk into a room and own it. But deep down, I wasn't sure if anyone ever saw me." She glanced up at him, her eyes sharp but tired. "My college boyfriend dumped me the day after my mother died. Said I was too much, too closed off, too broken." She gave a dry laugh. "And Nathan, the man everyone thinks was the one, was a corporate mole. Slept next to me every night while secretly working to destroy my company." Luke's grip on his mug tightened slightly. "So Luke," she continued, her voice dropping, "when people look at me, they see money, power, maybe beauty if the lighting's right, but they don't see the nights I spend reading medical journals because I can't sleep, or the way I cry when I see old couples holding hands." She turned to him fully now. The firelight danced across her face. "So I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." Luke didn't move. "Ask. If I weren't Ellen Barrett, if I had no money, no name, no face anyone cared about, would you have stayed?" The question didn't come like an accusation. It came like a whisper of fear, a final defense. Luke looked at her, really looked at her, not the gloss, not the brand, but the woman who had carried a lifetime of abandonment behind a perfect smile. He set his cup down slowly. "I stayed," he said. "When your body was broken, your name was unknown, and the only thing keeping you alive was a ventilator and a thread of hope." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I stayed when there was no guarantee you'd wake up, when no one else came, when the world didn't know who you were, and frankly, neither did I. All I knew was that there was a woman lying in that bed, and she was alone." He paused, his voice steady but quiet. "I stayed because you were human, and because somewhere in that silence, I felt something Real. Ellen inhaled sharply, but the tears came too fast to stop. Not delicate tears, not cinematic, but raw, ugly, honest. Her shoulders shook as she covered her face with both hands. Years of pain, rejection, and pretending dissolved in seconds. Luke moved to the floor in front of her, slowly, giving her space. But she reached out first. She gripped his shirt, buried her face in his chest, and let go. He didn't try to fix it, didn't offer empty comfort. He just held her, tightly, gently, like something sacred. She wept for the girl at the window, waiting for her father, for the young woman who thought thinness would buy affection, for the CEO who built a kingdom only to realize she was queen of a lonely castle. And when the tears subsided, she whispered, "I'm sorry." "For what?" he asked, brushing a damp strand of hair from her face. "For not believing someone like you could exist." Luke smiled, soft and real. "I'm not perfect, Ellen. I've got a lifetime of scars too. But I see you, and I care, not for what you are, but for who you are." She closed her eyes, breathing deeply for the first time in days. It wasn't a love confession, not yet, but it was something deeper, trust. The rain had stopped by morning, but the sky still held a soft, silver hue. From the 12th floor, Austin's skyline looked washed clean, like the city itself had exhaled. Ellen Barrett stood barefoot in her kitchen, wrapped in a long robe, a half-empty mug of coffee warming her hands. On the table lay a letter. The handwriting was neat, familiar. Her name written plainly across the front. Ellen. No title, no pretense. She had already read it 3 times. "Ellen, I never meant for it to get this complicated. I stayed by your side because no one else did. And as the days passed, I stopped seeing you as a patient and started seeing you as a person. Then, as something more. But I can't be both. I can't be your doctor and be the man who's falling for you. So I'm stepping away, not because I want distance, but because I want truth. I don't want to be your physician anymore. I want to be the man who walks beside you, by choice, not duty. And I'll wait, if that's what it takes. Luke." She didn't hesitate. Within minutes, she was out the door. No makeup, no carefully chosen outfit, just herself and a long coat thrown over her pajamas. She took the elevator down and stepped into the brisk morning barefoot, the pavement cool against her feet. At the edge of the drive, Luke was walking toward the gate, bag slung over his shoulder. "Luke!" she called, her voice sharp and clear. He turned, surprised. She stepped into the open, the wind tugging at her coat. Her hair was still damp from the shower, her expression unguarded. "You forgot something," she said, holding up the letter. He gave a faint smile. "No, I didn't." Her eyes glistened. "You can stop being my doctor. You can even stop coming to this house. But don't walk away from this." She hesitated. "Don't walk away from me." Luke's jaw tightened, emotion flashing through his eyes. "I thought I had to be whole," she said, voice trembling, "to deserve someone like you. But maybe love isn't about being perfect. Maybe it's about being real and choosing each other anyway." He stepped closer. Rain-stained leaves crunched beneath his shoes. "I never wanted you to be perfect," he said softly. "I just wanted you to be you." She gave a half laugh, half sob. "Well, here I am. No filters, rain in my hair, mascara probably smudged halfway down my face." "Perfect," he whispered. And then she reached for him. He dropped his bag. They collided, not like a movie kiss, but like people finally letting go of what hurt. They held each other tightly, fully, as if afraid the world might disappear. And maybe for that moment, it did. 1 year later, on a sunlit Saturday morning, a small crowd gathered at the edge of East Austin, where the streets were quieter and the buildings older. Tucked between a used bookstore and a community garden stood a newly renovated brick building with wide glass doors and lavender growing along the steps. Above the entrance hung a wooden sign, "The Marlowe Barrett Center," where healing isn't just for the body, but for the heart. Inside, the space felt warm and lived in. Sage green walls, soft music playing from corner speakers, donated books on every table. The clinic offered free and low-cost care for those without insurance. Veterans, single parents, the elderly, and anyone who had been turned away elsewhere. Luke ran the medical side, working 6 days a week with a team of volunteers and residents he personally mentored. Ellen, meanwhile, handled the funding, outreach, and mental health programs. She spoke at schools, hosted workshops, rebuilt not just a reputation, but a purpose. Reporters came on opening day, some curious, some skeptical. Ellen stood at the podium in a simple navy dress. She didn't wear sunglasses. She didn't hide behind jargon. "I used to think love was earned by being flawless," she said, her voice clear. "But then someone sat beside me in a hospital room and reminded me I didn't have to be perfect to be worth staying for." She turned, found Luke in the front row, and smiled. "And now I get to spend the rest of my life offering that same reminder to others." Later, as the doors opened to the public for the first time, a little girl came in with her grandmother. She was holding a broken toy in one hand, a scraped knee on the other. Luke knelt to greet her. Ellen stood nearby, watching. He looked up and caught her gaze, and in that moment, everything made sense. They hadn't just survived, they had rebuilt, together. Life isn't always measured by accomplishments, wealth, or what we've built. Sometimes the most meaningful moments come from what can't be counted. A steady hand during our weakest hour, a gentle voice breaking the silence, or the simple presence of someone who chooses not to walk away. The story of Luke and Ellen reminds us that healing doesn't always come through medicine. It often begins with kindness. One man, carrying his own grief, sat beside a woman the world had forgotten, not because he had to, but because he chose to. And in that choice, something powerful happened. Hope returned. For those of us in the later chapters of life, who've seen the world change more times than we can count, this story is a quiet reminder that we still have the power to offer something profound. Our presence, our patience, our care. You don't need a title, a degree, or a fortune to make someone feel seen. Sometimes you just need to stay. Luke didn't know who Ellen was. He didn't care about her name, her wealth, or her past. What he saw was a human being fighting to hold on, and he chose not to let her fight alone. In a world that often values speed over substance and appearance over connection, this kind of loyalty feels rare. But it doesn't have to be. Each of us, no matter our age or stage, can be that quiet anchor for someone else. So maybe the lesson is this: you don't have to fix everything. You just have to be there. Because sometimes love isn't loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's a chair pulled up beside a hospital bed, a voice reading poetry into the night, or a promise whispered in the dark. "I'm not leaving." And when everything else fades, money, titles, applause, it's those quiet choices, the ones made in secret and offered freely, that carry the deepest meaning.